Hey guys, what's up? Brent Kalmer from Blue Water VST. Thanks for joining me for this video. This time we're going to go a little old school with a throwback ensemble called Scenario. This is a real-time beat looping environment. It's an ensemble from 2003, so it's about 10 years old by now. But what's really interesting about this is that it's a great way of using limitations. You know, we're so constantly aware of all of the options that we have at our disposal with modern looping environments like Ableton Live. And sometimes that can work against us because always in the back of our minds we think, isn't there something else I could do, something more I could do, some other complexity that I could introduce into this set? And we lose touch with the music. We lose touch with the actual joy and the inspiration of just getting things going and jamming and looping and just having fun with this stuff and getting inspired. And so that's what this is going to be an exercise in doing. We're going to take a look at using some loops with this and throwing them together and just using what we can with what is at our fingertips and getting going with Scenario. So that's coming up next. Let's take a dive in. Now, first things first, I should tell you where to locate Scenario. You can find this under Factory, Ensembles, Classics, and Grooveboxes. And I think this is the first classic I've ever done a tutorial on. So we're making history here today. But otherwise, back to the interface, what we see here are 4 separate beat loopers. These are basically 4 samplers, and they all have the same controls, things we would expect to see like sample selection, which allows us to choose the sample that's being pulled from the sample map. Offset is the start position of the sample. Loop length is the length of the loop that we're playing. And if we get this going, we have to start the system clock. Here's what we hear. Now these 2 illuminated buttons indicate that these are the only 2 samplers that we're hearing, the only 2 beat loopers. These other 2 are deactivated. So if I deactivate this third one over, now I'm only hearing 1. And if I adjust this sample selection, now I've moved to a different sample, and I can also adjust the offset, and you see the progress bar moves to indicate that I've adjusted that. I can also adjust the loop length and so forth, pitch it up or down. So that's kind of nice. We also have a 2-pole filter that works here. Now right now this is switched to bypass. The BPS indicates that it's bypassing that filter. If I switch that off, I now have this 2-pole filter in the mix, which is in fact a low-pass and a high-pass filter put together. I can adjust the width between those poles by using this width knob. The resonance, of course, using this reso knob. And I can randomize some of this filter movement to give us some movement and some dynamism across the loop. But that's basically the beat looper controls for all of these. Now the rest of Scenario essentially pertains to how these samples are processed. I'm going to reload the maybe I should just reload the ensemble in its entirety just so we go back to the original snapshot. Below here we have this microseq, which is a sequencer instrument that sequences re-triggering behavior. So this button below the power button for each of these samplers is a sequencer receiving button. If I turn this on, this will now begin receiving this re-triggering data that is here in the sequencer, and you'll see the playhead bouncing around here, indicating that it is now being re-triggered based on the data that is being drawn in for the sequencer. So that's an interesting way of slicing up your beats. We could just turn that off and use the sampler straight away if you like. Now we also have this loop effects section down at the bottom, and this allows us to do things like chop up individual parts and loop them. As I enable this, you hear that? I can up the loop length. We also have a smoothing knob that allows us to smooth out that chopping behavior. It produces some interesting effects as well. This slice manipulator is very similar to what we saw in Fast Effects. So it allows us to shift even and odd beats, reverse them even. So some great fill potential there. Infinity feedback is a wonderful feedback or a wonderful delay module that allows you to kick in a lot of delay without overloading anything. It's a lot of fun to use. And then of course we have a gate, which will give us a gated signal with a variety of other parameters. So sorry to give you the quick and dirty explanation here, but the goal is just to get you going and throwing these loops together and jamming with this. So now that we've covered the very, very basics of what this does, and I neglected to mention scene memory, which is essentially a snapshot sequencer instrument here at bottom. Now that we've covered most of this, let's get into looking at how we might use our own loops with this and just kind of start using the limitations that are at our disposal to have some fun. So that's next. Now, the challenge with Scenario is to work within its confines and come up with some inspiring ideas. We only have 4 beat loopers at our disposal, which really is something extraordinary. But of course, in this day and age where we have, basically a practical infinity of loops that we could use in Ableton or in other environments, this might seem a bit skimpy, but that's exactly the idea. It makes us kind of focus on what we have before us and get something out of it. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So let's take a look here. Now, these sample maps that load with Scenario are abbreviated, to say the least. In fact, there are really only 2 samples in the maps for beat loopers 1, 2, and 3. And in fact, there's only 1 for beat looper 4. So let's load a sample map of our own. Now, I am going to open the sample map editor by clicking on the waveform icon. I could also right-click on the waveform display if I wish. I'm going to go import sample map, and I'm going to replace these. I'm going to navigate to this part of my browser where I've set up these sample maps, and I have used the Reaktor sample map generator to create these. If you need a tutorial on that, I will put an annotation in this video that will link you to that, so you can just go right to it and watch the video. But I have rendered some loops from machine, which I would like to use, so I am going to click on scenario loops _ machine and open that, and these load right in there. And you hear from this that these are some of the machine sounds. Some very nice sounds in here. Now these are all at 125, so I'm actually going to bring down my tempo to 125. And if we get this going, I can move through these as I would with any other sample map. You'll see that the name of the sample pops up there in the header. So very nice, I can just move through there. And I can also click on this button on the sample select knob and use my arrow up or down keys to go old school with this. Okay, let's settle on that one. Now I'm going to load a different map with melodies in it, some of which I have just created and saved as samples, or saved as loops, excuse me. So I will load this, and there is, let's see. Now these are 125, so I want to make sure my other sample, the sample that I get with this, is 125. Let's go with this bass line. Now here's a problem, that the offset is set to 65, which means it's starting at a point in the loop beyond the original intended start point. So I'm going to bring this back down to 0 and see if this starts to lock in with that beat. Bring that filter down a bit. Now others, you've probably heard this group before. I think I've used it in a different video, but I like working with it. So now let's load another melody, like a lead melody. So we'll load the same sample map, but we'll use a different sample from that map. Which one is it? I think it's called Kalimba. There it is. Activate the sampler. Bring down this filter to give us more of the meat, or more of the energy in that sound. Now we can come down here to these effects and start kind of fiddling with these. What do they do? Let's check out the looper. Some nice freeze action there. Adjust the length of the loop. Smoothness. Some of these are going to sound totally off kilter. Get some interesting rising effects there. Drop that out. Let's try the splitter. Now, split determines how many slices you're using. In other words, we now have 8 slices. Shift A shifts the, I believe the odd bars, or the odd beats. Shift B shifts the even beats. That number of beats. We can of course reverse them as well. doing some really interesting things with that bass line. Now this Infinity FFB is a beautiful delay, and what's great about it is it won't overload, so you can get this going. And of course we have our gate. Gets those gated sounds. More dramatic effects by pulling down this hold. So a lot of options here at our disposal. Now this is one way of using it, where you're basically matching up different parts and you have kind of a beat and a melody and bass line perhaps. But another way of doing this is to use different samples, different loops that you might not think of putting together. So I could replace this with, say, the random step shifter map and see what we have in there. See if we can match up two beat loops. Bypass this on both of these, bring down this gain a little bit. I'm not sure that one works so well. We have some nice hat action there. Get that filter back in the mix. Now this one works quite well. So this is a great way of auditioning grooves against one another. And it's a lot of fun to use, especially when you start bringing this filter in the mix, because a filter will allow you to home in on different frequencies and isolate just the ones that you want to go together. Now in the next section, let's take a look at actually splitting up the drum elements between the different loops. Now another thing you can do is to take individual drum elements, say a kick or a snare and a hat, and loop them individually against one another. So let's do that. Let's import a sample map that has just kick drums, and these are from the Smoker's Delight pack. I know I need to get another sample pack. I'm a real cheapskate though, I can't help it. And this is kick loop 1, and then we will come over here to the other one. Oh, I don't want to merge it, I want to replace it. And let's see, go hats. And so now we will have our hats on one deck, if you want to look at them as decks, that's a helpful way to do it, and our kicks on another. And now I'm going to bring down this BPM so it's more consistent with what we're talking about. We're kind of in the, well, one of them's at 100 and one of them's at 80, so let's split the difference and call it 90. Now we're not hearing a whole lot. These are pretty strange sounds. Let's bypass these filters to make sure this stuff's not getting filtered out. Now sometimes when you're using purchased sample packs, it won't quite get it right. So it's really important to have perfectly cut loops. And in the bonus video for this, I will show you how to do that in Machine and in Ableton Live. It's really easy, but it's just one thing you have to set up correctly. And let's move through these and see if we can get a different one that actually works with. This one seems to work. Now, we can move through the hat loops as well, until we find one that works well against that kick. Now this one's pretty nice. It's just kind of a nice meditative groove there. And of course you could start this from a different point. So if you wanted to offset this groove by, 2 beats, give yourself a bit of a different vibe there. Sometimes all it takes is a little tweak. Now that one's really quite nice. And now after you've logged it in, you might want to click off that bypass and kind of filter that around, find out where that filter works best. Get that kind of old school sampler sound. God, I love that sound. I'm not sure if that's it, but in general I love that sound. And then, listen, we've changed up our hat pattern by enabling this loop. So you see, I'm just getting lost doing this. This is what happens when you start using these together, in a simple way, it becomes kind of this meditative experience. You're just using these grooves and really enjoying it because you're not overwhelmed with everything that you could be doing. It's much easier just to get locked into the music. And so I hope that's what you've gotten from this video. Now, there are a zillion other things I could show you, but in the interest of your time and just conserving everyone's sanity, I will leave it there. If you're interested in learning about the workflow tips in Ableton Live and Machine, go to bluewatervst.com and sign up for the How to Build a Sampler in Reaktor course. It's a free course. You'll learn a lot. I won't spam you or anything like that. But you'll also get access to the bonus content for the blog posts. And it's just a fun community to be a part of. Hope to see you around there. And that's it for this week, guys. I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.